You're listening to SaskScapes, a podcast featuring the stories of arts, culture, and heritage in Saskatchewan. I'm Kevin Power. My guest today is Saskatchewan-born author and actor Jean Freeman. Meeting Jean was one of those moments in life when you feel as if you've been reunited with a long-lost friend. We spent some time together before recording the podcast, and I'm still feeling the effects of a great deal of laughter. Jean is, above all, a storyteller, a very funny storyteller. Jean could spin a story about a napkin on a floor. In fact, she all but did when we had lunch together. There was a napkin on the floor, and on our way out, Jean moved that napkin with her cane and made an event out of the entire moment. A short story to follow, I'm sure. I've made a new friend with someone, and I feel I've known her forever. My challenge was to remain composed, but know this, I was exercising a great deal of restraint and trying not to fall off my chair laughing. The title of this podcast could easily be Sliding In Sideways. Well, have a listen. You'll see what I mean. Jean Freeman, every once in a while, the universe conspires to bring two people together for a very good reason, and today is one of those reasons. I can't tell you how happy I am to meet you and to have you as podcast number one guest, so thank you for joining me.
I think that's marvelous, Kevin. Thank you so much for looking on it at that. I mean, I could be the guinea pig in the experiment here. That perhaps the canary in the coal mine. No, I'm just the first of many guests that are going to be part of your podcast.
Well, in a way, we're all really guinea pigs in our own experience of life, aren't we? True. Going around on the treadmill.
True.
Trying to find our way.
And to do something positive while we're just running in circles. Yeah.
Right. So let's start at the beginning
of
your positive contribution.
That far back, yes. All right, start at the beginning. A very good place to start.
It is to quote Roger Smith.
Exactly.
This is when we break into our musical
into
podcast.
Song, exactly.
Right. So I'd like to go back to your being born in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. And
I don't remember much about that day, if that's what you're looking for. No, all right, okay.
No, we don't need to go into the labor pains, but I'm wondering, in the time in which you grew up, what it was like living in small town Weyburn, Saskatchewan.
Well, as far as I've been concerned, in the 80 years since it happened, it was the best of all possible times and the best of all possible places. Now, having said that, you have to recognize, too, that it was just on the, not even the shank end of the Depression. 1934 was not a propitious time for anybody to be born. And Weyburn, Saskatchewan, although it was in a wheat area, and it was not, it was Dust Bowl, it was not a prosperous time, but it was a good time. I was never conscious of things that I couldn't do, couldn't be, couldn't attempt. And so consequently, I came on books early, and my parents did not buy books. We didn't have a lot of money for things like books, but we had the newspaper. My mother read the funny strips to me every night faithfully, and they set a high quota on education, and they felt that education was really a good thing to have. And so, although university was never held out as a promised thing, it didn't say, well, when you go to university, when you become a doctor, nobody ever set any goals or any limits on what I was doing. So I read books. I hung out at the library with Mrs. Griffin, who was probably about she was younger than I am now. But for me, of course, she was 4 years older than everyone.
Right.
And but I got to look at all the books. I got to read the books. But I never realized at the time that people wrote books. I thought they were all written by dead people. So it wasn't until I was probably in grade 4 or 5, my best friend's uncle wrote a book, and he was alive. And she brought a copy of the book to school, and she and I sat on the steps outside and read it. And I realized that real people could write books about places like I was growing up in, because the book was Who Has Seen the Wind, and her uncle was W.O. Mitchell. And so that sort of brought everything, you talk about what goes around comes around, and about the 2 degrees of separation. That was for me how it all got started, the whole thing about books and writing and creating, and because it was about the same time that I used to bring the kids from the neighborhood in, and we would have, the way children always do, we would play. And I said, Kevin, you're going to be the daddy, and you take the teddy bear, and that's the baby. And when you come home from work, you put the baby on the table, and your wife is making, and that was my start as a director. And then I found out that I could actually I'd say, Kevin, you're going to come in and say, Mary, I'm home. And that was when I started realizing that people wrote lines for people in plays. So, it all sort of slid sideways into place.
And people did what you told
them to do. And they did what I told them to, which was a real feeling of power. Up until I had children, it was sort of the most powerful thing that I about creating, because with a play, with things that you could write the script, you could decide how the ending was going to be, you could decide what was going to happen, and people had to do what you told them to, which was always a good thing.
Are you an only child, or did you have siblings?
I was an only child for 10 years, but I have one very beloved brother who's 10 years younger than I am. And yes, we were the traditional 2-children family.
And did he play a part in, or perhaps because he was younger than you, did you have an artistic influence on him?
I don't know. I think he turned out very well in spite of everything. He promises me every so often. I bring up the story about when he was little and I was babysitting him and he was misbehaving. And he was an adorable child because he had one of those big sausage curls in the middle of his forehead. And our mother always dressed him nice. He was always a sweetheart. But he was misbehaving, and I shook him and made him cry. And I remember distinctly this little 3-year-old standing there and saying, Jeannie, don't be mean to me. Now, he insists that this never happened, and he did not hold it against me, and he has spent the subsequent 70 years, forgiving me. But he went into totally different lines of work. He became a social worker. He helps people, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Has 2 marvelous sons and 2 great-grandchildren, and so we sort of diverged, but we still had that Weyburn upbringing and that prairie sensibility, I guess.
So apart from the librarian of Weyburn, can you think of other people that inspired you? Were there actors that came through town? Was there a theater?
Well, there was a thing at that time. We had Chautauqua. I've been told there were Chautauquas, although I don't remember going to a Chautauqua, which was, of course, the tent show where they brought in actors, but they also brought in lecturers on very, very high subjects. So there were those things, but there were also sort of itinerant traveling groups that would come around, and they would set up camp for a week or so in a town. And I'm sure there must have been some sort of fundraising involved, probably to keep them eating, but they would set up and they would produce a show, and they would cast from kids in the neighborhood and from people in the church choirs and things, and put a show together. And then there would be, the big celebration, and they would usually have costumes they would bring. There would be it was like a living newspaper. They would have somebody with started out in front of the curtain saying, extra, read all about it, and then there'd be something about the town. So we had things like that, but it wasn't until I was in high school that I was blessed to have a teacher. She actually was the English and Latin teacher who had a thing for theater, and her name was Andrea Eckel, actually, and she took summer classes in Regina at the Saskatchewan in Fort Capel, Saskatchewan Summer School of the Arts. And there was a couple, the Jameses, Mr. and Mrs. Burton James, who came from Seattle, Washington, and they taught summer classes. They had been at Banff, and they were professional theater people. And she came back and said, it's this wonderful, wonderful couple, and this is what they were doing. And so we started creating our own plays in high school. And we actually went to the drama festival in Saskatchewan. We came one year and took part in the drama festival because we had created a play called Storm. Now, you've got to remember, this is 1951, 1950, and it was about drugs in high school. If you remember, that's a long time ago before drugs became kind of au courant. And so we were investigated by the local officials. The school board was not at all sure that this was a subject that their children ought to be doing plays about. But we did, as I remember in the play, we were against drugs. We were not in favor of them. Mm-hmm. We were against it. But anyway, we put this play together. There was a wonderful woman named Kay Parley, who was a local writer in Weyburn. And she subsequently came to Saskatchewan after many years. And so these two ladies, under the influence of the James couple, sort of spread their word to us in high school. And consequently, when I graduated from high school, I really had nothing that I intended to do, but I thought that there was perhaps something that I could find that would have, I enjoyed this writing business. I enjoyed this playing, doing things on stage. And so I wound up being a radio person in Yorkton because they had a radio station. And at that time, Weyburn did not, but Yorkton did. So I became a continuity writer for radio. And of course, that meant you got to do everything because it was a small town radio station and they signed off at midnight, which meant if you worked there, you could play with the equipment until 6 a.m. when they signed on again.
Right. And did you have the opportunity to do any announcing at that time?
Oh, yes, because we got to, we wrote our plays, we announced, we learned how to operate the turntables and play the records and do all the things, and we would do it off air. And so that sort of gave me the requisite hours of performance and practice. And then when I eventually moved on, then I came into Regina and went into first radio there and then television. And because it was the beginning of CKCK television 60 years ago, they first went on the air. And it was, again, the biggest sandbox in town because we got to invent things. Nobody had ever said to us, oh, you can't do that because you don't have the budget, you don't have the equipment, you don't have the training, you don't have the experience. So we just did everything we wanted to and turned out pretty well.
So that was the transition. You went from there to Regina.
Yeah.
Has that always been the plan that you
well, no, it's just as I keep saying, I sort of slid sideways into things because there was a point shortly after I had left high school and when I was just getting started in radio, a friend of mine whom I had grown up with in Weyburn was going to drama school. She was going to London, to England to learn to be an actress. And I thought that sounded pretty neat. So I took they come through the people from the big companies come through Saskatchewan from time to time to audition kids, and I did audition for RADA, for the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, and I was accepted. And then at the age of 18 or 19, I was faced with a great dilemma because I didn't have any money. My parents didn't have any money. I'd never been out of Saskatchewan. I'd certainly never been to another country. And I had no idea what I would do. So my friend, who happened to be Shirley Douglas, she went on and she did very well for herself going to London, becoming an actress. But for me, I decided that television was probably the next best thing. So that's how I went to CK Television in Regina and again helped. They had a little theater group in Regina, joined that, got into that. And that was sort of how the transition began into the performance end of things.
So there was never a time when you thought, what else would I do if I weren't involved in some kind of creative field? You hadn't considered other things?
I don't think I've ever thought of that. No, I just always thought that whatever else I did would be in addition to whatever it was I was doing. If I was performing in a little theater, if I was doing plays, I would still have a day job where I could make money and eat. If I was doing those things, I was still writing because usually I was writing. I worked for I worked for television, but I also worked for the Saskatchewan Arts Board. I was a writer. I was a PR person for them. And then I worked for SaskTel. I was one of the founders or one of the first employees for Cable Regina, which is now Access Communications. And so I have a tendency, I like to start things. I like to put people together. If I see Kevin Power and I think you should meet so-and-so because, and then put the two of you together and then see what you do. As long as I don't have to do the heavy lifting, I let you two carry on and do what you will. So things have sort of went in that direction when I got into the beginning of the television on stage kind of thing. And it was about that time that the first movie, the first intimation of movies and things began to happen.
Jean, tell me the number that's on your actor card.
My actor card is number S10, which stands for Saskatchewan 10. I think actor in Saskatchewan was the 10th place to have actor. 00001.
And tell me the story behind being number one.
Again, I slid sideways into it. I was working at CBC at the time. I was on air on CBC Radio and did a program called Matinee Comment. It was in the days when people like Peter Zosky had Matinee national program, which had local cut-ins. There were 15 minutes a day from each of the regions, and so they had regional broadcasters, which I was in Saskatchewan. And so we got to do that, and by virtue of being on air with CBC, we were eligible to join ACTRA, the Performers Union. And I thought it sounded like a wonderful thing because, they were looking out for things like working hours, things like opportunities, things like fair payment and details of contracts. And I thought it sounded wonderful, and I thought I want to be part of this. So we had an organizing meeting where they had someone who came in and talked to us about what ACTRA was and what it could do and what they'd like from us. And then at the end, they said, now we've got a sign-up sheet here. If you'd like to be part of the union, please do that. Well, I happened to be sitting at the front of the room, and so I stood up and I went and signed. I angled Beatty Martin out. I think Beatty was number 2. And so we, over the years, they've made a lot of the fact that I was the first, but it was only because of the seating arrangement. It wasn't any virtue that got me there, or even hard work.
And you've been acknowledged this year as Woman of the Year.
I was, which is a very, very, as I say, it was unsought and unexpected and most appreciated.
And an award that you share with Shirley.
With Shirley Douglas, my old friend Shirley Douglas. Shirley was the first Woman of the Year for ACTRA. That was 5 years ago, and of course been 4 other marvelous women since, with Mary. My mind is going blank. Yes, the Amazon warrior who's just taking on Rob Ford at the moment. Anyway, yes, it was unexpected, unasked for, uncalled for, and most appreciated. I do appreciate it.
Mary Walsh.
Mary Walsh, thank you.
Hey, it's Kevin. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Just a quick reminder that the SaskScapes podcast is available for free on your favorite podcast app, or you can stream it from your browser. Check out the show notes for the link. On the SaskScapes homepage, you'll notice something new under the logo called SaskScapes Plus. You can't miss it. There's a big button saying support with a heart icon next to it. I'd love it if you could click on that button and help keep this podcast series going. When SaskScapes launched in May 2014, it was the first podcast in the province celebrating arts, culture, and heritage. In fact, you'd have been pretty hard-pressed to find any Saskatchewan podcasts. So I'd like to think that we paved the way. It's been because of your support that this podcast is now in its 9th year. Okay, that's it. Enjoy the rest of the episode. The beloved Canadian icon, Mary Walsh. It's been a big year from you. You earlier this month won the top publishing prize at the Saskatchewan Book Awards for Fist Upon a Star, a memoir of love, theater, and escape from McCarthyism, about your friend Florence Bean James.
Yes.
Tell me the influence Florence had on your life.
Well, she had a profound effect. If you go back to my story about my first introduction to professional theater or through theater in general. My teacher at high school was one of the students who had taken classes from Florence and her husband when they were teaching at the summer school, and also when they'd been teaching in Banff. And so I had heard about them and about the work they did. And when I graduated from high school for a couple of years, even when I went into community theater, I would go for summer classes. I'd go to summer school and take classes. And I was taking, by this time, Pop James had passed on and Florence was teaching by herself. So I had met her. I had her as a teacher. And then when I went to work as a writer for the Saskatchewan Arts Board, she had gone to work for the Arts Board as the drama person and drama resource, and went out to all small towns in the province spreading the word about community theater. And we worked together. I shared an office with her, and she was trying to put together the book that her husband had wanted to write about how they came to community theater, about how they had established the Seattle Repertory Theater, and about the way they had fallen afoul of the Un-American Activities people and subsequent things that happened to them. So anyway, she was trying to write this, and she'd say, I'm not a writer, I'm a performer. Could you help me with this? And I said, of course, I'd love to. So she would write some things and I would do some editing, and then she would tell me stories and I would write them down. And then she would write some more and I would edit that. And we worked on for a matter of, actually about 20 years, I think we worked on that, until she got the story to the point where she felt she had said what she wanted to. So that was how it all began. It wasn't really setting out to write a memoir or to spread it. It was somebody helping, doing a labor of love for a friend, and it's had remarkable results.
I think most people in the arts would say when they look back on their career that it sounds like it was all well planned and well executed and thought out, but yet it's often just the stars aligning in all the right places at all the right times. But you sound very calm about the way it all fell into place. But were there moments of panic, of what will I do, what will happen, or?
Not that I remember. I mean, not in that respect. I very often had that feeling about how am I going to make a living. My husband was a musician, wonderful man, wonderful musician, but musicians, like artists and writers and performers, are not it's not the most lucrative profession in the world. And so we had 3 small children, and my husband on the road a lot with his various bands. And so I had a variety of jobs, most of which were not connected in any way to the arts, unless it was something like the Arts Board, where I was supporting other arts programs, or with Cable Regina, Access Communication, where we were establishing a new communication foundation, new communication entity. So that part of it I had some, but mostly it was working other jobs where I was doing public relations, doing internal communications, doing things that paid the bills. And there were times when I, would sit down at night and look at the pile of them thinking, what do we pay tomorrow, or do I buy potatoes again? So it's never been a case of, I've always managed somehow to fit in the creative part of my being with what I had to do in order to make things happen. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think that's one of the joys of living life in the arts, is that somehow it falls into place. We look out for each other. The connections that we make are somehow magical. And
very often, although I have known, as I'm sure you have, Kevin, people in the arts who were absolutely driven because they were focused on that one thing, and their art, whether it was visual art or sculpture or writing or acting or singing or making music, was the one thing. And if they could not do that, then they weren't alive, they weren't it. And many of them, came to rather sad ends. Thank God I've never been faced with that problem. I've never had the highs. I've never had the the alpine heights of creativity, I guess you'd call them. But I haven't had the lows either, which has been great. I've always had, I'm quite happy with community theater. I'm quite happy with corner gas rather than, um, orphan black. And so it's been, it's been something that has worked for me, but it wouldn't work for everybody.
So you've merrily tripped over a small little credit of yours as Fitziy's grandmother in.
I was trying to sneak everything in.
No, it was on my next list of how that transition came. But I would certainly, if I were you, I would put that in the highs category.
I would too. Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, that's as high as I would like to go. It was purely by accident because I had an agent in Edmonton who had been representing me as an ACTRA member, as a performer, for commercials, for the odd commercial. And at that time, there wasn't all that much film activity in Saskatchewan, although it was picking up. We're talking, back 20 years ago. And so it was getting a little, but it really wasn't enough to warrant having an agent. But she called and said they're doing a pilot for a series and they'd like you to. They've had a look at your resume and they'd like you to come out and do it. So I went out and I read for Emma. That was the only part they had at the time, which was, of course, Oscar's wife. And it was so funny. It was just and I thought, oh, this could be a hoot. And I read, but then I found out, well, that Janet Wright is going to play Emma. So, so that was fine. But then I got called and they said, would you come? They're doing, I forget which episode it was. And so I got my sides and I had a look and I had no name. I was just the mayor's grandma. And we had really funny lines that the writers were so good to grandma. And they gave me such wonderful lines. And of course, that was the episode in which I had the line about the world's biggest hoe, because we are an agricultural community. I think that our symbol should be something of an agricultural nature, like the giant hoe. And then, of course, there was a lovely play on it where they had to try and explain to Grandma why this was not an appropriate thing. So that was fine. I did that. Well, then a little while later, I got called again, and by this time, I had a name, and I had by this time done my own backstory. I knew who she was and why her grandson was named Fitzgerald, and that my daughter, his mother, had this thing about the Kennedy family, none of which ever got into anything, but it was my story. And so by the time 6 years later, after I'd done 26 episodes, I finally got a first name. And it was the episode about the jam making competition when I stole Emma's recipe for jam, or I appropriated it. And when they made the announcement and said, and the winner is Helen, and I thought, who the hell is, and then everybody else said, who the hell is Helen? And that was me. So it was wonderful, it became sort of a full arc, but it was not necessarily the arc that I expected. But it was great fun. And of course, it was like people said after the show had closed, they said, after 109 episodes in 6 years, what was it like, what are you doing now? And I said, well, pretty much the same as what I did before, which was you get together every summer for a few days. It's like summer camp. You go to summer camp with your friends and you see the people you haven't seen for a year, and you have a good time and you have, a little few laughs and then you go home and you do whatever it was you were doing before. So it was one of those, as Brent Butt, brilliant Brent Butt said, it's like lightning in a bottle. You never know where it's going to happen. And when you get it, you catch it and hold on to it. And that's exactly what it was. I just was so lucky to be in the right place at the right time.
I'm trying to maintain a sense of composure, but for everyone who can't see us, I am really trying to hold myself in from falling apart with laughter. It is impossible to talk to you about your life without laughing hysterically.
Oh, I'm glad that I'm bringing that sense to our conversation. I was afraid it was going to be really dull.
No, you are. What occurs to me is that you were very groundbreaking as far as a female in this business. I think that you are a great champion for for women in the arts. How do you feel about roles for women who have matured in years?
That's so delicate. That's so
Thank you.
delicate, Kevin. And that's interesting. Well, certainly, I'm an advocate for women doing anything women want to do, and that certainly goes in film, in television, in performance on stage, where and writers. I mean, some of the best writers, current and past, are women, and also performers. There is there has been a certain bias that has happened for a long time over the years about women and their roles in a whole variety of things, not just in performance, but the fact that after broadcasting, for example, television is a good example. The news programs. What is a woman's role, or what should a woman's role be in the news gathering process? We have a lot of women who are extremely good reporters, have been for years, and they would go out, find the stories, get the facts, get the details, do the interviews, those things. And then it was the sort of pretty little thing that was 20 years old, who, and I don't mean to sound ageist, but I am, who would then be on air because that was what people wanted to look at. Well, if you look at least Canadian broadcasting at the moment, we have some women of mature years who are on national news, who do the reporting and do a hell of a good job of it. And the same thing goes for television performance, drama, comedy, and those. I mean, look at Betty White at the age of 80 plus, 90 something, and she's still going strong. Now, this takes a lot on the part of the performer, but there are women out there, just like there are men of that age out there who are capable of doing the job, but it requires a lot of support from the industry, because you have to have people who say, okay, well, yeah, we will make the scenes shorter so there aren't so many lines to learn. We will arrange things in such a way that the lines are easier to remember, or that in some ways accommodate the person. It's the same way with Michael J. Fox and his disability, and the fact that he has been able to go back and carry a full series as a performer. Now, granted, I think he's just been canceled, but that's beside the point.
Right.
It happens to even the best of them.
Right, but the fact that they were willing to make it.
And the fact that they were willing to take a chance on this, and to accommodate what was needed so that he could continue to contribute. Because for every one of us, every person my age, over the age of 75, every person who has a disability, every person who is fat, every person who is skinny or funny looking or whatever, for every one of those, there are people out there, kids out there, people who are looking and saying, I could do that. Yeah, they're doing that. I could do that. Somebody said not long ago in the Actor, I think in the Actor magazine, somebody said, if our little girls particularly, but if our kids can't see something being done, then they're not going to think that they can do it either. So if you see somebody performing, or somebody heading up a broadcast network who is a woman, somebody heading up a whatever who is a woman, and you're a little kid who's a little girl who's 9 years old, chances are you're going to say, gee, I guess I could do that. Yeah, I could do that. I mean, when I was little, there was no film industry in Saskatchewan. There was, in fact, a filmmaker in Saskatchewan, a man whose name was Lawrence Cherry, who was a marvelous, marvelous man. He and his wife, Evelyn. Anyway, they were based in Yorkton, and when I came to Regina for the first time from Weyburn, Yorkton, and I was in Little Theatre, and somebody said, oh, there's a man who's making a movie, and he's auditioning actors, and he's looking for, and he had taken book, I'm going to forget all the relevant details, but the, wonderful Saskatchewan writer who wrote down in the Swift Current area. It'll come to me. Anyway, he had this book, and it was As for Me and My House was the name of the book. And so anyway, I went down to the Hotel Saskatchewan, and I read a script, something for him, and I was probably 18, 19 years old, and a little on the chubby side, and nothing special to look at. And after I finished, he said, "You're perfect." He said, "That's just, you could play the schoolmarm, just perfect." And I thought, isn't that wonderful? I don't know what this is, but I'm perfect for something. That's great. And he said, "Now, I don't know when we're going to start." Because he said, with filmmaking, it's about raising the funds. It's about raising the money. So he said, could be a while. He said, we're going to try and raise the money. We're going to try and make this happen. But in the meantime, he said, you just stay the way you are. He said, just don't lose any weight. Don't just wait, because that was 1955, and I'm still waiting for that call. That's why I say I am the shape I'm in, because I'm still waiting for Lawrence Cherry's call. Now, he has passed on. It would have to come from the other side, but he was the sort of formative film influence that I had.
It's often our perceived weaknesses, oddities, that are our biggest strengths. And if only the industry would recognize that all the time. But when they do, it's gold. I think that's the gift of being a character actor, is that
yes,
we continue to become characters as we grow.
Well,
as we age.
if not just in the performing aspects of life, but if you can persuade young people that it's trying not to be pigeonholed, trying not to be always the perky blonde with the with the upturned breasts or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have more to offer than just the way you look, the way you sound, the way you whatever your background is, then the sky is literally the limit. I mean, you can do pretty much anything and do pretty much anything.
The film industry has changed radically in Saskatchewan again.
Sadly, yes.
What was your involvement around the time that change started to begin, which was not that long ago, just a couple of years ago?
No, not that long. Coroner gas, of course, had ended, and but there were one-off films that were being produced. There were things that were happening, and people who were. We had arguably among the best crews, the best trained people backstage in the production areas of any place in Canada, and of course with Saskatchewan, if you look at the locations in Saskatchewan, go everywhere from sand dunes and deserts to the what looks like the ocean up in the north, and this is a perfect place to produce films. So it looked as though things were really shaping up and looking pretty positive. Now, when the beginning of the end came, of course, was the sinking of SCN about
mm-hmm.
the television network channel, and we had a feeling at that time that this was the camel's nose inside the tent, and sure enough, the camel followed. So we went out as union members, and we all joined together and protested, and we marched, and we tried to lobby and tried to get people to intervene, and of course there were theoretically measures that were taken that would, this is going to replace, and it's not really about this, it's about something else, and about this is going to reflect, and of course by the time the dust settled, nothing remained. And the people who were the not necessarily the performers, because they were pretty mobile anyway, but the crews, the people who actually made things happen, had moved on to other centers because that's where the work was. And now, I think one of my favorite stories, which is only peripherally related to what you're asking, but when they announced a little while ago, maybe just over a year ago, that they were going to produce a new series called Fargo, based on but not like the movie, and they were interviewing the producers at the time, and they said, have you decided where you're going to make this, where you're going to do the shooting? And he said, well, yeah, we're trying to decide at the moment. He said it's going to be someplace between Calgary and Winnipeg. And I wanted to get up and say, "That's Regina, you silly ass." Regina's right between town. Anyway, of course, what he meant was they were looking at both those centers. Winnipeg did not get it because they didn't have enough snow at the time. Calgary got it because they had lots of snow, and that was what they were looking for. But Regina would have been perfect. That would have been, just about the right spot to shoot Fargo.
It will come back.
I
It
hope
must
you're
come
right.
back.
I hope you're right.
I hope I'm right.
Maybe not in our generation, Kevin, but maybe our following generation.
If people hear the stories of life like yours, then we have a reason for it to come back. It's very important. What do you have to say? I know what I have to say when I'm asked this question, but what do you have to say to young artists who want to find their way in this business, no matter what the discipline, whether it be writing or acting or producing or radio, in a very challenging time in this country where work is hard for anybody? I once heard a figure skater interviewed, and he was asked the question, what would you say to hopeful figure skaters that are training and coming up? And he said, if there's something else you'd rather do it, because it's only the people who must do this. You were saying earlier, that drive, people who must do this, that survive in the business. Do you think that's true, or do you think there's always a place, and just because you're not sure what that looks like yet, you still owe it to yourself to try?
Well, I think that there are some creative people who know, and however they know it, I don't necessarily know, but they know that they must do whatever it is. I must paint. I must write poetry. I must sing. I must. So there are those people, but then there are an awful lot more, and I think I was one of them, who aren't quite sure. Maybe that's where my love lies. And I know when I was starting out and didn't know what I was going to be doing or what, one of the pieces of advice I was given was learn something you can fall back on. And in those days, it was being a secretary. If you knew how to type, and you could always, it was a movable skill. Well, today there are movable skills in technology that, if you know how to do this, then you can switch over and work there. You can get a temp job here. You don't have to be a barista. You can do something else. So yes, when you're not sure, but then also get as much experience in as many things as you can. Read a lot of stuff, particularly if you think of being a writer, but just read anyway. Read what's being written. Watch movies, watch television, see what's happening, what's being done out there. Look at performers, look at live performance whenever you get a chance. Go into a field that you're not familiar with, like opera. We have now the opportunity in Western Canada and a lot of other places to actually see the Metropolitan Opera and the London Opera live on high definition television in the movies. So people who have never had a chance to do anything but hear opera on radio or can now see that particular art form. Go to art galleries. Go to say, I'm not into hip hop. I'm not into country western. Go try it out. See what. You never know when something you're going to stumble over is eventually going to come in handy. I'm a believer that nothing's ever wasted. Whether it's good or bad, you learn something from every experience. So I would say if you're going to be at all possibly interested in or active in some field of, or some part of the cultural field, luck plays an awfully large part, yes. But the harder you work, the luckier you'll get. Because when the luck strikes, when that sideways motion happens in your world, you will be ready because you've already done the groundwork. You've tried, you've practiced, you've learned how to move, you've learned how to dance, you've had some singing lessons, you've been in a little theater production, you've been in the music festival, you've done all the things that you could try out to see. And if somebody says, well, now, Kevin, have you ever done it? You can say, yes, I have. How many hours here? Well, I just had an introduction, but that's, and so you're miles ahead of the guy beside you who hasn't tried that yet. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it does. My grade 4 teacher for the entire year said no matter what writing you do, you're not allowed to use the word like. Now, in 2014, we used like as I was going outside, right? And like somebody said to me,
What a
but you
brilliant
weren't allowed to
teacher.
use, well, I could do my own podcast on her.
Yeah.
So any other word but like, how do you feel go deeper than that? And I think that being exposed to all of those art forms, at the very
Yes.
least, gives you a language to express how something moves you or not.
We talk just for a moment about the influence of teachers. You mentioned your grade 4 teacher. My son, a brilliant, brilliant child I have, and I had 3 brilliant children, but this is one brilliant child. My son had a grade 2 teacher who, in my estimation, was one of the finest teachers that ever. Her name was Mrs. Qualley, May Qualley. And when Jack was a little guy, he loved to write. He loved to write poetry. And he would write poetry at the age of 7. And his teacher, and he occasionally did it, quite often did it, when he was supposed to be doing something else. And Mrs. Qualley made a deal with him and said that it was all right if he was writing poetry, it was all right, even if he had arithmetic to do. It was all right. It was good to write the poetry, but that he would, then make a deal with her that he would do the arithmetic when he finished the poem. When he graduated, not just from grade 2, but when he graduated from public school, Mrs. Qualley gave him a tin can. She had taken a potato chip can and had put a cover on it that said Jack's Poetry. She had taken every one of the poems that he wrote when he was in grade 2 and had copied them onto little squares or little circles of paper and put them in. He turned 52 next week, and he has that can sitting on top of his television set. Now that is a teacher. That is a teacher who really formed not just the study habits of one little kid, but the way he's looked on life and the way he has approached things ever since.
It is the most honorable of professions.
It is.
It is. And a great responsibility.
And they deserve stars in their crown. They really do.
And Saskatchewan is riddled with teachers that, just give of themselves endlessly to recognize the potential in
and so much is demanded of them now that they're not given the support or they're disrespected, they're attacked on all sides by parents, by society, and they can't they're expected to bring all children to the same level, at the same speed, at the same time, whether it's a child whose family has just escaped from a third world country and they don't speak English at home, or it's a child who has been in the school system ever since kindergarten and knows what's expected and knows how to deal with this, or it's a child who has special needs. And the teacher is expected, usually without outside help, to bring all that along. These people are incredible, and we owe them. And then they're expected at the same time, and so many of them do, to introduce the whole idea of culture and music and singing and poetry and all those things, as well as getting all the required things.
That's one of my hopes, is that these podcasts provide a legacy for the voices of people like you, so that teachers can share these stories with their students, that their students get to hear the lives of people that they may never meet. I don't think we know that, those of us who have the responsibility of guiding young students, I don't know if we really know that it's 1 nanosecond of feedback, of recognition that ignites a spark, that takes us on a journey that we can't define it until we live it, but we always go back to where it started, and it most often is the inspiration that a teacher gave us or the potential that they saw in us. It's a great responsibility. And
it is, gift. And it's so valuable, and I'm delighted that what you're doing is going to contribute to it, because anything we can do to help the teachers teach is a real blessing.
But we never stop learning. So what's on Jean Freeman's bucket list? What if I said, here's a magic wand, you can wave it and set off to do the next big adventure? What might that look like?
Oh, I have all sorts of things. I don't have a bucket list. I don't have a bucket list of things that I must do, should do, could do, want to do. But there are just things that appeal to me. I think I said to you earlier, I'm planning to sign up for some classes this fall in improvisation, because I really admire improv players. I admire people who can make things out of nothing, and can never say no to something. In improv, I understand you always say yes. I'm on my way right now to a conference in Calgary, which is on creative nonfiction, and something called bricolage, which is creating works of art, whether it's visual or literary, poetry, writing, whatever, out of found objects, out of things that are just there. And that appeals to me. I mean, I looked at after I'd heard of this, and bricolage, what is that? I looked at my mailbox and realized how many things are in my mailbox that I normally would just toss out. And I looked and I saw, something here that says, it's never too late to take the first step, or something over here, something that. And I thought you could put those together. And it's that kind of thing. There's always the unknown out there that I want to do. And of course, I need to lose 80 pounds and eat better and
no,
all
but you
those good
mustn't.
things.
that role is still waiting
The
for
role is waiting, right? And I've got I've got play scripts that I'm working on, and I still go out and speak. I'm a professional speaker, as we like to call ourselves. And so there's no lack of things that I really, and of course, watching all the young people that are out there doing things like yourself, who are creating and doing new things that are happening, like the Moose Jaw Arts Center with the pantomimes that are going on out there, and creating new plays and new combinations of plays. It's just there's no end of good stuff.
You find possibility in everything.
I do. Life is an eternal possibility.
And you will slide into it sideways.
I will.
Every step of
Screaming all the way, yes.
but loving it.
In the very best possible way.
I hope we get to continue to hear your voice.
I do too. This has been a really marvelous, serendipitous event, and I do appreciate it. So thank you for letting me be number one on your hit parade.
Well, you are number one on the actor card in Saskatchewan, and you're number one on my hit parade. So thank you. It's been a great privilege. Thanks for listening. The SaskScapes podcast is created by Kevin Power as part of the Culture Days Animateur program operated by SaskCulture. Funding to the cultural sector is provided through the Saskatchewan Lotteries Trust Fund for Sports, Culture, and Recreation. If you want to hear more of these podcasts, or to see the great work being done by other SaskCulture animateurs, please visit www.iheartculture.ca. Music for SaskScapes is provided by Saskatchewan-born singer-songwriter Jeffrey Straker. There is no end to the stories to be told. So, until next time,